we look back at the race for Indiana governor. Mike Braun emerges from a crowded Republican field, a surprise for lieutenant governor, and more on this special episode of Indiana Week in Review.
Indiana Week in Review is made possible by the supporters of Indiana public broadcasting stations.
The week ending May 10th, 2024. U.S. Senator Mike Braun easily won the crowded Republican primary for governor, with the Associated Press calling the race for Braun just as the final polls closed in the state. Braun's final margin of victory was about 18 points, even as his opponents were a formidable group, some of whom spent millions in a race that went negative over the last several weeks. Braun says some of his opponents already reached out to congratulate him.
You have thick skin to get through it, and then you have to be very forgiving and don't hold any grudges if you're going to actually get something done.
Part of Braun's message is informed by his service in the U.S. Senate, where he railed against government spending.
And I think it's going to be up to the states to show how we get this country back to where the founders intended it to be. Freedom and opportunity, the two most important things.
Braun will face off in November against Democrat Jennifer McCormick and Libertarian Donald Rainwater.
Mike O'Brien, did anything about these results surprise you?
In the end, the easy analysis, if I've been saying for 3 weeks, is usually the right one. And the analysis on this one for a very long time was Mike Braun had a very big lead. He had money to back that lead and ran a disciplined campaign that the only thing he could do was ruin it for himself, really, in hindsight. And he didn't do that. He ran a disciplined campaign. He stayed on message. They didn't get distracted.
And had the Trump endorsement.
That's still, I mean, he won 3-1. You know, I mean, there was a question this week whether Republicans should be concerned that Nikki Haley won 24% of the vote. The answer is not really, because they all still showed up for the Republican primary. So I don't think there's any indication that there's less support for Trump, and Mike Braun certainly benefited from that. I think, you know, and now he's saying the right thing and what he just said. You know, this was a historic campaign for Republicans. We had 6 candidates, spent $40 million, and the outcome pretty much stayed what it would have been if the primary were on, you know, May 7th, 2023. And now he's saying, all right, let's get together and get this done in November, and that's what we're going to do.
Are you surprised Braun won quite so easily?
I'm surprised that Braun didn't win bigger, to tell you the truth. I mean, he had Trump's endorsement. He was Trump.
We had 3 or 4 other really credible candidates.
He spent an incredible amount of money. He was completely well known. There were no surprises. Everybody knew who Mike Braun was, and 60% of the Republican primary voters voted against him. That is surprising, because if Trump is as powerful as you seem to think he still is in the general electorate, that makes a difference. The things that were said in those primary contests, whether it was for governor or for Congress, I mean, 10 years ago, they would have been shocking, calling people liars and tools of the enemies of the country. And the things that were said are incredible. And Mike Braun...
That's true of America.
That's true, thanks to Trump. That's the way we've deteriorated over the years. There's no question about that. But still, he was a known quantity. He was well-financed. He did run a disciplined campaign because he said nothing. I mean, he railed against Biden. He embraced Trump as wonderful and demagogued about the border, and that's about all he did. And yet, 60% of the Republican primary voters rejected him.
I want to ask about the bottom end of the primary results for governor. Curtis Hill coming in, it looks like, 6th out of 6th.
Hallelujah.
Being beaten by a few thousand votes, it looks like, by Jamie Rittenauer, who, quite frankly, a few months ago, nobody had really heard of outside of her her circle. Is this the end of Curtis Hill's statewide political career?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, he's tried multiple times since then. He tried in the caucus up for Jackie Walorski's seat when she unfortunately passed. That didn't work. Now he's tried this dead last. I mean, getting beat by a complete unknown. Yeah. You know, he doesn't. Convention. Yeah, he lost the convention. I mean, he's 3 for 3 lately, and it might be time for him to just find a lawyer job.
I never thought of that. He lost an election, a caucus, and a convention. There's no fourth way to lose.
As you look at these results, it feels like I don't know that we're going to hear from any of the other 5 candidates much anymore. I mean, Suzanne Crouch, at her age, is probably her political. Retirement makes sense for her, or at least something outside of elected office. Brad Chambers was a political newcomer, probably just goes back to the private sector. Eric Doden, kind of maybe the same thing. Is Doden the only one you could see maybe trying to be involved in some other way?
And Jamie.
Okay.
Yeah, because she's still a newcomer.
Yeah,
she's had some name recognition now, so there's still opportunity to try again,
Yeah.
right? So I feel like she could come back, definitely. Maybe not for governor, but another office, because now her name is getting out there. She's more known than what she once was, because no one knew her before.
The week ending June 21st, 2024. Self-proclaimed Christian nationalist Micah Beckwith scored a stunning upset to become the Indiana Republican Party's nominee for lieutenant governor. Beckwith defeated gubernatorial nominee Mike Braun's pick for running mate at the state GOP convention in what Braun is calling a bump in the road. Braun likened having a running mate who wasn't his first choice to dealing with feisty employees or customers in his business, and he says it's clear that he's in charge.
My running mate can say whatever he wants. If it doesn't make sense, if it doesn't resonate, remember, I'm going to be the governor.
Beckwith says he looks forward to working with Braun. He says he's not going to be divisive or a flamethrower.
I want to be a unifier. I want to extend an olive branch. I want to make sure that, people are heard. I think the conservative movement, the grassroots movement that I'm a part of, I believe they feel unheard.
Beckwith built his campaign on the idea of being a check and balance to the governor. He beat state lawmaker Julie McGuire for the nomination by 63 votes out of more than 1,700 cast. And does Beckwith's nomination create an opening for Democrats?
Oh, I think it absolutely does. I mean, it shows how out of touch with voters the Republican Party is. The Indiana Choice Coalition just did a poll. And not only do people repudiate the near total ban the Republicans have imposed, but they want a ballot initiative by almost 80% of the voters. They want a ballot initiative, which Republicans are denying them. When you look at this, and I urge everybody to go to the Indiana Historical Society exhibit about the Ku Klux Klan. It's a 100-year anniversary since the Klan elected the Republican governor, Ed Jackson. And when you listen to the rhetoric that's posted on the walls there of what the Klan was saying in the 1920s, denigrating immigrants, trying to restrict academic freedom, trying to tell everybody that they had to be Christian. The only thing they've changed in this is taking it from white nationalists to Christian nationalists, but it's the same demographic. When you look at the rhetoric and you look at the fact that they say the Democrats who disagree with them are Marxist and they hate the country and all of the really hateful demagoguery that the Klan indulged in the 1920s, there is no whit worth of difference between what they're saying in 2024 as Republican statewide candidates and what the Klan was saying in the 1924 election. And that should be frightening. The only difference between the two is the statewide candidates in 2024 don't wear sheets and don't burn crosses. But otherwise, the rhetoric is exactly the same. And that is not what Hoosiers want.
I really regret suggesting to Ann and Ed DeLaney that they read a book about the 1924.
This is your fault, huh?
Wish I had that
It
one
is a
back.
good book.
Great book, though.
Braun, obviously, in the immediate aftermath, was spinning the line, I'm the one in charge, I'm going to be the governor. He can say and do what he wants, but I'm the one in control here. Is he the one in charge and in control?
Well, we've never elected a governor because of their running mate. The ticket, yeah, it brings some profile and it matters to some people, but largely we're electing the governor, and this is their running mate, and in this case, Plan A didn't work, so we're on to Plan B. And I think the convention goers. I was helping in kind of the days leading up to the convention, just kind of work through lists of uncommitted delegates, people I knew, and a lot of those people you could tell, and the conversation on the floor was a lot of people were waiting to just kind of hear from them both. To his credit, Mike Braun got up and nominated Julie McGuire. He did exactly what he needed to do, which was make it very clear that this is the person that he wanted, and didn't try to hedge or have it both ways, not really knowing what the outcome was going to be.
Although in the days, but in the days leading up, there was a lot of, well, if Micah wins, that'll be great too.
Yeah.
So was there hedging? Maybe not at the convention.
Not when he was talking to these people minutes before they went to vote. So to his credit, he did what he needed to do. But Micah brought a lot of energy, and a lot of people that I talked to, the delegates leading up to that, said, yeah, no, I understand. Like Mike Braun, I know that he wants Julie, but man, I've known Micah a long time. He's like, I don't really know what I'm going to do. There were a lot of those kind of conversations because this is like how Diego win the primary before. Well, he spent like a decade and a half meeting everybody that was in the room, and that's a very similar dynamic here.
Are we about, if Micah Beckwith, if Mike Braun wins and then Micah Beckwith becomes lieutenant governor, are we about to see the role of the lieutenant governor in Indiana change significantly?
We're seeing a lot of things change, I think, significantly. I know on paper this is the way things can work. You can work the delegation, you can develop forge those relationships, and you can come from nowhere and win. But this is not the way it works in my memory. And I mean, it was always the Bowen Orr ticket. It was always then the Orr Mutz ticket, the Mutz Goldsmith. I mean, you go right down the line. People are added as running mates to be additive, to plug a gap, or to bring geographic representation, or to bring gender balance, or to bring business smarts. If the other half of the ticket is spent a career in government, for instance, and people traditionally deferred to. I mean, that's just, again, I know we could find examples and exceptions, but this is a dramatic departure.
Niki, ultimately, do you think Beckwith on the ticket will end up changing the outcome?
Ooh, I don't know. I certainly think it will end up changing the Braun campaign. I think he's pushing some issues that they're going to have to face. Like, for instance, and that's one thing that when I talked to a bunch of delegates this week, they said that Micah Beckwith was talking to them about things they cared about, not about economic development or growing the economy. They wanted to know, what are you doing to help my area? How are you going to protect farmland? How about these property taxes? And he is discussing those things. And to be fair, Mike Braun isn't discussing those things. So maybe he'll push him that way a little more. In terms of the question you asked about seeing Lieutenant Governor duties change, I've heard some sort of chatter in the background. I think that would be hugely knee-jerk and reactive if a supermajority Republican, legislature suddenly removed a bunch of duties from an elected position. That would not go down well.
In reaction to something that he did that was pretty egregious.
The week ending October 25th, 2024. Indiana's three candidates for governor met on a debate stage for the final time this election cycle, highlighting their different visions for the state. Republican Mike Braun, Democrat Jennifer McCormick, and Libertarian Donald Rainwater addressed many of the same issues they've discussed before, including property taxes, cannabis, and abortion. But they also tread new ground on issues such as labor unions, cutting government jobs, and gun regulations. On that last topic, McCormick highlighted a frequent target, Braun's running mate, Micah Beckwith, who McCormick says is too extreme for Indiana.
He also said he wants his guns untraceable and unregistered, and that is just scary.
Braun pushed back, arguing he has called for strengthening Indiana's red flag law. That law allows law enforcement to temporarily take away someone's firearms if they're a danger to themselves or others.
Well, she constantly defaults to something other than what we're talking about, who's going to be leading the state. And my record on all these issues are clear.
Rainwater sought to stand apart from both his opponents, and on the gun question, that meant opposing red flag laws.
Because we're that close to our government telling us that because we go to this church or we're a member of that organization, that we have a mental defect and therefore they need to take our guns.
Election day is November 5th. Chris Mitchem, who had the best performance last night?
Yeah, I pride myself on being an equal opportunity praiser and criticizer. So I will sit here and say I thought Jennifer McCormick had a really good night. I thought she looked really composed compared to the other debates. She had a really good balance between policy and attacks and kind of looping her policy in with different attacks. And it certainly was, I would say, more of a 2-on-1 against Braun this time compared to the other ones. And I think you could probably expect that with the amount of kind of ads that have been going towards Rainwater from the Republican Party. But credit to Braun, though. I think with a 2-on-1, he did stay above board a lot of the time, despite a lot of attacks, I think, trying to drag him down. The only times he did was when the other two were kind of gaining up on him. So I think that was a good sign of him trying to stay above board, kind of focusing on the kitchen table issues that has gotten his campaign to where it is today, that I think a lot of fellow Hoosiers relate with.
So now you say nice things about Mike Braun.
That's kind of hard.
who had the best performance last night?
Obviously, Jennifer McCormick had the best performance. Mike Braun was going through the motions. That's all he was doing. You know, he bought himself a Senate seat. He wants to buy himself a governor's seat. And, you know, what's really interesting to me is he wants to keep all this distance between him and Beckwith. He's going to be the oldest elected governor we have had, and we have been unfortunate enough to lose Frank O'Bannon while in the governor's office. So Jennifer McCormick is right. Micah Beckwith is a heartbeat away. And on top of that, Mike Braun has shown a predilection, or at least a tendency not to serve out. I mean, he left his legislative position in the middle of his term, and he served only one term as senator. So, you know, you've got this. I think what really expressed it best in this is you've got a contrast here between somebody who's, you know, and I know the common sense term was a little overused, but it is common sense versus the extreme. I thought the ad that Jennifer McCormick has on with the Republican sitting on the back of his pickup truck saying 20 years of this extremism is enough. I'm voting, as a proud Republican, I'm voting for Jennifer McCormick. Because when you listen to this stuff, I mean, we have the most restrictive abortion law in the country, okay? Mike Braun says it was a very good project where they actually went out and talked to voters. Nonsense. They didn't talk to any of us about that law. And Beckwith would make a 10-year-old who's the victim of incest carry that child to term. I mean, they're extreme, the most extreme ticket in the country, and that's the choice.
Obviously, Braun is the front runner here, but there have been some questions about maybe a lack of enthusiasm for Republicans in the state surrounding his campaign. Did he do anything to change that last night?
I think what's happened is, for the longest time, he was so clearly the front runner that no one really kind of was thinking about the race. Like, you know, it wasn't top of mind because everyone just assumed that he had it in the bag. And as we got closer, it appears through actions and polling and things that it's much closer than people have thought. So, you know, I don't think he did anything to hurt himself. I think he and Jennifer gave similar performances. I think Donald Rainwater's was probably the weakest of the three. I felt like he was a little off his game, maybe, you know, because of the attacks he's been undergoing.
Do you think that voters will be going to the polls on November 5th or in the days leading up to it, thinking about the running mates in this race?
Traditionally, that is not the case, but this is not a traditional race or traditional ballot, because in the past, at least in recent past, since we're the time frame we're talking about, the eventual nominee had great say over who his or her running mate was going to be. Not the case this time. It was sort of thrust upon him. So that's an interesting dynamic right there. So you can't necessarily use history as a guide. And also, you've never had such a concerted effort on the part of a challenger to make it part of the public discussion and part of the public conversation and consciousness.
The week ending November 8th, 2024. Governor-elect Mike Braun says his big election victory gives him a platter of opportunity to tackle the kitchen table issues he ran on, including property tax and health care reform. Braun says his double-digit victory in the governor's race gives him a mandate that can help further his agenda as he works with the state legislature.
And I'll accept it humbly and try to engage everyone in my own party along with good ideas across the aisle.
Braun says an initial focus of his transition will be reviewing state agencies and their leadership.
It's going to be my vision of being an entrepreneurial governor that's going to be conservative on the financial side, but very entrepreneurial on the problem-fixing side.
Braun says he likes to move quickly and to expect agency leadership announcements to start soon. Ann DeLaney, does Braun's win give him greater leverage with the legislature?
No. I mean, we have a weak governorship with a simple override, and you've got a lot of crazy people in those Republican caucuses, so I don't know how you necessarily control them. I know he says he's going to solve all these problems, but I'd really like to know, with the scale back of income tax and corporate tax, how you're going to fix property tax at the same time you fix what they've screwed up with education over the last 10 or 15 years. I mean, part of the reason property taxes are as high as they are is because the percentage of funding from the state budget for K through 12 traditional education has plummeted. And property taxes per student have doubled over that period of time. We have one of the highest property tax increases in the country. So what is he going to do with that? Is he going to continue or shrink the property tax at the same time he doesn't increase the funding? I think he's going to have a lot of rural school districts coming and saying, what are you doing to our education system, where we have reading down, we have the number of people from post-high school getting additional education has also plummeted under their watch. He's got some really big challenges ahead of him, and he's got some crazies in his caucus. And if they want to scale back these incremental decreases in income and corporate taxes that nobody really feels.
Oh, I can predict fairly safely that's not going to happen.
Well, then how do you fund this?
But let me ask this. So, again, talking about that relationship with the legislature has been Republican dominated for more than a decade now. We've had Republican governors, obviously, that whole time. And they've shown a relative willingness to go, that's nice, we're going to do what we're going to do, and you're going to sign it or you're not going to sign it, and we don't really care all that much. Does a 13, 14-point win matter to them?
I think it does, because I think the theory, as we were getting closer to the election it felt like it was getting closer, the governor's race was getting closer. I know the House Republican campaign committee was worried about losing the Zionsville seat, the Carmel seat, probably the Brownsburg, the Brownsburg seat.
And that one's still up, and that one is still technically up in the air.
66 votes, I think. So there was an idea that, well, if Braun wins by 4 or 5 or 6, and they lose the supermajority, well, someone's going to they're not going to be happy about that, and that's going to translate to their willingness to go take on a big legislative agenda. Well, of course, none of that happened. He won by 14 points. Supermajorities, Becky Cash and Tiffany Stoner, that race notwithstanding won't matter. And a lot of what Mike Braun is already, he's already engaged state agencies starting Wednesday, literally Wednesday, to analyze budgets, analyze personnel. What are they doing? Do a SWOT analysis. He's really quickly taking a businessman approach to the administration of state government. But a lot of those changes, if he wants to consolidate agencies or rearrange things, which it sounds like it is in part of the conversation, a lot of that's going to have to go through the legislature. Those are statutorily created agencies largely, and so he's going to need some buy-in from the legislature. But the legislature's also spent the last couple of years really taking a hard look at the organization of state government. What are these agencies doing? So there's a world where Mike Braun and the Chris Garton and Todd Houston, these guys that have been looking at the government that way, could come together and go, no, you're right. We do need to reorganize and create efficiency here.
To that end, there's so much on the legislature's platter of opportunity for the upcoming session. There's so much on the table. The budget, but then all the things within the budget and all the things that cascade down from that, the issues that they're trying to tackle. Does a kind of big reorganization of government fit into all of those other big plans?
Maybe, but I think, so here's something that I think is a little monkey wrench in all the plans, is the Lieutenant Governor, Michael Beckwith. So I'm curious to see how he fits in with everything. Because I think even though stars may be aligned for Braun and the legislature, we don't know what he's going to have to deal with internally when it comes to Beckwith. I think that's where his challenge is going to be. I don't think it's going to be the legislature. So I'm kind of excited to see how this plays out, because I think it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, is the biggest unanswered question about Mike Braun's gubernatorial term what role Micah Beckwith is going to play beyond the statutory one?
Yeah, I would call it 1B, I think the legislature will probably be very supportive of a lot of the basic things. The two issues that I think might be more problematic for Governor-elect Braun are the two that he was most strident about, which are property taxes and health care stuff. I think they'll look for some smaller things, but not these massive overhauls that the Braun people would prefer on that. I also want to know, and of course it's a 14-point win, it's big, but he received fewer votes than Eric Holcomb did 4 years ago, guys.
The two big things that clearly Braun is most focused on, healthcare reform and property taxes. On the property tax side, while he had this relatively detailed plan, he also has said all along, listen, I'm just casting a vision. Lawmakers will work out the details. So they're going to do something about property taxes. Is anything basically a win for Mike Braun in that sense?
Well, he'll declare it a win.
Right.
So, so I suppose you could do that. But the question is, do the voters feel it? And do the education or the educators feel it? I mean, that's the biggest problem with tackling the property taxes. I agree, they're too high. And we supposedly had a solution from Mitch Daniels before, remember? All we have to do is put the highest sales tax in the country in place, and the property tax problem is solved for good. Well, it was solved for about 16 years, and it's back again.
Mike Braun is clearly, I think, this is my perspective, more passionate about health care reform. It's something he cared a lot about in his business. He talked about it in the legislature. He talked about it when he ran for the Senate. He's talked about it throughout his time in the Senate, and now a lot as governor. Is that arguably the harder battle, and will he be less willing to declare victory no matter what?
Oh yeah, it's the harder battle. I mean, the legislature's been trying to tackle that for forever, but especially for the last 5 years when it was discovered that we have some of the highest costs in the country, right? And so they have been trying, and made harder by the fact that state government and state legislatures don't control healthcare policy, most largely. And so but he does understand, and you've seen it at the State House the last couple sessions. He does understand from his own experience that is the number one concern in business right now. It is their ability to sustain a workforce and a healthcare program, and he tells a good story about what he did as a business owner to do that. And it's why you see the Manufacturers Association, the Chamber of Commerce. It's not the drug companies and the insurance companies lobbying at the State House on healthcare. It's the employers.
That's Indiana Week in Review for this week. You can find our podcast and episodes at WFYI.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Enjoy the rest of your holiday weekend and join us next time, because a lot can happen in an Indiana week.
The opinions expressed are solely those of the panelists. Indiana Week in Review is a WFYI production in association with Indiana's public broadcasting stations.